Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hey, everybody. This is Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events and the Eating at a Meeting podcast. And this is the second live episode today because we're talking to women who are kicking butt in food and beverage. And we're here to celebrate Women's History Month and women that are making their own history currently with what they're doing in the food and beverage industry. And I'm excited that my guest now is Mona Esposito, aka the Grain Lady. She has her own hotline and she is a personal coach on all things grain. She is an activist and advocate of restoring heritage grains to Colorado and supporting and recreating the network of farmers, millers, and makers needed to make regional grain economy thrive. She co-founded the Noble Grain Alliance in 2016 and served as president and founding board member of the Colorado Grain Chain in 2019. Hello, Mona.
Hi, Tracy. I'm so happy to be here today. Thanks for
having me. Too. And I don't even remember how I found you except through Krista from the Slow Food Nations conference, but I'm so glad I did because it's so interesting what you're doing. And I'm going to say full disclosure up front because I sent this to you in a note. Yes. Is most of my listeners listen to me talk about, we need to feed the people with gluten-free and I want you to make sure you've got vegan options and all of these things. I am about inclusive eating. So no matter what kind of way you eat, whether you eat gluten-free or you eat gluten, I want to make sure that you have something to eat. And the more education we have about all sides of it is really important. And that's why I want to talk to you.
Exciting. I agree. It's all about transparency and information.
Exactly. And, I've got a lot of people that I follow on websites that are gluten-free and are advocating for things to be labeled gluten-free. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I love what you're doing in educating people on what heritage grains are and just grains in general. So can you tell everybody what inspired you to do this and what it actually means that you're doing?
Absolutely. And, interestingly enough, I really didn't have any of this information myself. And that's how I fell into it. I've been a home baker for over 15 years. And at the time, I was baking bread at home, and I was, I thought I was checking all the boxes. I was using organic bread flour, King Arthur's, thought I was doing everything right. And then I started hearing these murmurings of other grain movements in the country, and hearing about these interesting varieties like Turkey Red and Warthog and Sonoran White. And all of a sudden I had this aha moment that I hadn't been putting any emphasis on really what was the main ingredient in baking bread, on wheat. I had although I was, an avid gardener and farmer's market customer, I knew my farmers, I had no idea where my wheat was coming from. I didn't even really have that concept of, I knew flour came from wheat, but that was about all I knew. So it just came from this moment of going, I had no idea that there were these options, and I had no idea what had happened to wheat in this country in the last 60 or 70 years, and how far we had strayed from wheat as a local ingredient, wheat with flavor, wheat with nutritional value. So I just started asking questions, and then when I couldn't find it, I was like, well, I want this, and I want to mill my own grain. but that wasn't happening in Colorado at the time. The grain was here, but it was mostly mass produced and industrialized and exported. So that piqued my interest. So it was as a consumer and basically out of necessity.
So, I mean, we don't think about it. We go to the grocery store and you see the variety of different brands of bread and the freshly baked bread that's at the grocery store, not just the packaged bread. But so how do you know? I mean, just find a local bakery that's focused on this? Or, I mean, how do you get away from that, processed bread? Right. And does it, and a whole nother subject we can get into, and I want to, does that impact our guts?
Sure, absolutely. How do we know? That's a fabulous question, because it's actually fairly confusing.
Great.
Well, I mean, that's where sort of my latest incarnation as the Grain Lady comes into play, as a resource and a source for really navigating something that was really pretty commonplace in our diets and as a local food source, that with the industrialization and the commoditization of wheat, really has strayed pretty far from that, so that most of us don't really understand where that particular food source comes from. But yes, definitely on the local level, talking to bakers. There are some really great books out there. Amy Halloran, The New Bread Basket, she wrote a fantastic book about what's going on in the local grain movement throughout the country. So really, it's just tapping into one or two of those sources, and then starting to educate yourself. But talking to your farmers, like you said about heirloom tomatoes. Years ago, we had no idea. Now we can rattle off Cherokee Purple or all these different varieties of tomatoes. We're not quite there yet with wheat, but it is, that conversation is becoming more common with growers, with bakers. We are really talking about wheat with character, varietals with different flavors, characteristics that really, much like we talk about wine and coffee, right, with this sense of terroir and this sense of being of a place and having certain characteristics from that place. So it's just a mind shift from something that really did not have, for many, 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 many years, had a very strong identity, and then suddenly was, pretty much obliterated with a shelf-stable product, grown in monocrop situations, really devoid of flavor, devoid of nutrition. So it's just coming back to that. It's like the tomato, like you said, the heirloom tomato that you eat. You go, whoa! I never knew a tomato could have this flavor. Right,
exactly. Yeah. Because my mom loves heirloom tomatoes, and so she's like, "Oh my God, I can't wait for them to come into season." Yeah. Well, I mean, so as a gluten-free person, I've tried to make, stuff at home, and I use a lot of pre-made stuff now, but, sorghum and amaranth and, looking at those gluten-free varietals of it, but I've never, and there's all those different, when I pull up the gluten-free list of foods to avoid, these are all the different varieties of wheat.
Sure.
And so it does get I never thought of them as different flavor profiles and things like that.
Yes.
Just different names, right? Yeah.
Right. Because, what you get in the supermarket is, it's not just one wheat. It's for example, bread flour. It's, it's a custom blend to make sure that those wheats used have what's necessary for you to bake bread.
Right.
So it's really just an education, and really a lot of it, it's interesting there. I talk about wheat a lot because I bake bread and I make pasta, and it's just part of my Italian background. I like to eat it a lot, and I know that, eating a lot of processed foods and white flours, as well as I know that wheat needs special treatment in order to make it digestible.
Okay.
So if it's something you have every once in a while, great. If you want to eat it all the time, this is what I was talking about. It's a little more complicated. There's many levels from the seed all the way to table, that once you understand what's happened and what's happening with these grains, you can really get a handle on integrating them back in your diet if you don't have serious issues with gluten.
And okay, so on that note, when you switched to that on your own, did you see a difference in your own diet and the breads you were making as well?
For sure. I mean, I definitely felt a different feeling. Well, definitely a different feeling in my gut. I knew at a certain point, I was like, like I love to eat that pizza and that pasta, but I didn't feel so great afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And and as we get older and our metabolisms don't work as well, you can't ignore those feelings as much anymore.
Right.
And then also, I wanted to sort of link in even the grains that don't have gluten. What's really important is integrating a lot more fiber in our diets. So whether you're doing that through whole wheat or other whole grains like the non-gluten-free varieties, that's really pretty key. So once I made that shift to these varietals and having them in their whole grain form and making sure I was preparing them in a way to make them more digestible, I just felt more satisfied.
Okay.
I have that, sort of quick rush you get when you eat carbohydrates that are refined.
Okay. Well, okay, so that's really interesting. So it does help. It balances other things out that you wouldn't necessarily think of.
Yeah. And really, so I haven't said it yet, but the key to making gluten more digestible is fermentation. And
Okay.
so, in the bread world, fermentation is using a natural leavening agent like a sourdough starter.
Okay.
And that helps break down, without getting too technical, and I'm not super good at the science part of it, but it helps break down the proteins, because gluten is just a protein, that are in wheat that make it difficult for our guts to digest on their own. I mean, that's a fact. The stomach has a difficult time digesting gluten, and it's always been that way. And in the last 60, 70 years, with all these advances in processed foods, there's most breads are quick breads, and most products, don't take that long fermentation that helps break down the proteins to make it more digestible. So that's on the level of bread. It applies to legumes as well.
Right.
If you take a step and soak your legumes in something acidic, cook them, that helps break down these proteins that are difficult to digest.
Well, that's good to know, because we all just pour out the can and
Exactly.
and eat them, or interesting. Okay. Oh my gosh, there's so much science behind food and we don't think about it, and we just are so used to just cooking it and eating it and then being done. And
we're busy. And there's a lot of information to process.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, so we want to know where our food comes from. And okay, so we want to make sure the packaging is sustainable, and we want to, have as little food waste as possible. And how's there possibly enough time in the day?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's another shift, a shift. I mean, I think the pandemic really highlighted this for a lot of folks, and gave people this opening into actually having the time to really cook with intention, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. And I think, well, I know that the CSA sales have got skyrocketed, and so people are trying to get to know who their farmers are versus going to the grocery store. It's local.
Yeah.
It really has given us time to be able to do all of that because we're not spending 2 hours in a car commuting,
right,
etc.
Right. And it's really, shown a light on the gaps in our food system.
Oh,
right?
Big time. Yes.
You couldn't get flour at the market.
Or yeast.
Or yeast, right? Because everyone was like, well, I'm going to bake it myself. So those communities that, already had this local grain system in play, we were really lucky.
Right. Okay, so what does a local grain system look like?
There's actually, quite a bit of infrastructure that needs to be in place, which was in place throughout the country prior to the commoditization of wheat, right? So every town had its own, maybe multiple mills. You had growers growing the wheat, in different varieties on a smaller scale. So you were connected to that particular food source.
Right.
So now it's much getting back to that place again after all these small farms had been bought up and
Okay.
outsource everything. Much like the meat industry, the farming, the live, what do you call it when you grow, when you raise animals?
Husbandry? No.
Oh, it's just not coming to me, but it'll come to me later.
Okay.
But so many of these smaller farms that were also raising animals, to butcher on a small scale, to find someone to take that small scale was a big problem.
Right.
Because everything was so large scale. Same with wheat, right? If you didn't have, 5,000, 10,000 pounds of grain, you couldn't take it to the local grain.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But that used to be done all on a much smaller scale. So it's really, part of it is, the grain chain starts with the grower, with the seed, but then getting it and that requires equipment, smaller scale equipment to harvest, and to thresh the grain. And then from that point to the consumer, the grain has to be cleaned. So these operations are now very large scale. So it's just harder to, there's all this small scale system that has to be put back into place that was at one point very accessible. We need millers again.
Right.
So it's everything.
Well, and it's interesting because I posted an article today of a butcher in DC.
Yeah.
And he grew up on a not so nice side of DC and just opened a gourmet butcher shop in Georgetown.
Nice.
And he opened it 2 days before the pandemic shut everything down.
Wow.
But he has restructured and is thriving, but he's selling and he's self-taught. And I think that's kind of the same way with you, is you're self-taught about all these grains, and that's what's bringing back this heirloom heritage, quality food that we need to eat and understand.
Right.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we're so often in the States, we're so polarizing or dogmatic about things, especially, from a food and dietary perspective, right? Like, okay, well, I'm not having any grains, I'm only eating paleo, I'm only eating meat, or no, I'm doing this. It's really all about moderation and making choices, right? So to be able to make those choices, you need to have the information, and food needs to be more accessible.
Yeah. And Michelle Payne, I was talking to her, and it is about the choice, being able to have the choice.
Right.
And you can think about that with food deserts and everything. I don't have a choice except to go to the local, bodega. All right. So we were talking before we got on about, what is it like to be in the a female in the food and beverage industry? And I want to also say I'm going to assume a food and beverage a woman in the grain industry. Is that something to also think about as well? Are you the only woman in the grain industry? I don't think you are, but
I'm definitely not the only woman in the grain industry. No, in fact, Monica Spiller, she's in California. She has a wonderful website called the Whole Grain Connection. She has been advocating for these grains, I think, since the 70s, and for eating grains in their whole form, where you get the most nutrition and flavor, for many, many years. And there's lots of amazing women doing great work. Even growers. I mean, there are quite a few female growers as well, and millers. So, sometimes the bread world seems dominated by males. Even the chef world sometimes seems that way. I like to think about, prior to chefs and bakers becoming celebrities, and and even years before that, women were the seed savers, right? Their role on farms to select the best seeds to save, to grow in subsequent years. And this was based on many, many factors. It was based on the health of the plant. It was based on the flavor, what the applications that they were best in. So, women have always had that role. Women have, always had the role of being the influencers in that way, flavor and nutrition.
And so true. And, when you look at it, we can look at it in so many different perspectives, but we were the ones that were making food and passing it on. I say we, I am a woman, and I'll just throw myself into that bucket.
No, I mean, but it's a part of our history, or our HERstory. I remember speaking with a grower in North Carolina who was growing sorghum. We were just talking about, having a farming tradition in our history, and that most people have that in their lineage, and not that long ago, right? And I started to think, my mother is Italian, and she grew up in Bologna, and she grew up on her grandparents' farm. And so I was, and I knew that. I had heard stories about, the chickens and having to catch the chicken, and that was her job. And but we hadn't really talked about other stuff. And so that day I got on the phone, and I said, "Mom, did you grow wheat on the farm?" She was like, "Oh yeah, of course we did. I think we had like a little mill to mill it, and we had the wood oven, and we baked with it." And I was like, "Mom, how did I not even know this? Like this is what I do." I think it's in our bloods, it's in our history. We've just we just had this rapid industrialization of our food happen in the last 50 to 100 years that we've strayed from it. And, in the last 20 to 30 years, we have been coming back, right?
That's pretty cool. And it reminds me of my mom and my brother. My brother was allergic to eggs and she's like, "I always made him cakes without eggs." And I'm like, "But you did that without the internet."
Right. How did you figure that out?
and took him himself. I'm like, "I need your story, because this is like this is what I do." Yeah. So, what are some things that you appreciate about what you do and look forward to in what you do as well?
Well, sort of back to that, to this idea of the grain chain. I mean, what I love about what I do in that aspect is I get to be connected and to connect all links in the chain. So, there's nothing I love more than hanging out with farmers and being there when they harvest wheat, or talking about seed, or just being out on the farm. I garden myself, and I just, that's that part I love. And, all the way to the end user, where I get to teach workshops and I get to talk to people about these grains and how they can integrate them, and I just get excited about the flavor. So I appreciate being connected to community all along that chain.
I like that. And it, because there are so many steps to getting it to the plate, and there's so many people that are part of that. We want to know who they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Who have you been your role models?
Such a tough question. I think all the people that have mentored me, that have really taken the time to not just to let me experience what they do and how they live their speak, right?
I like that.
How they, that are doing the things that give them joy, really. I just, all along the way in everything, because it's been a pretty circuitous route to where I am today, but all the pieces, of course, in one's life bring you to the place where you are today.
Right. Okay, so on that note, you're also a photographer,
mm-hmm.
And I think, you have to be using that medium as well while you're on the farm talking to all these people to document that
mm-hmm.
that verbal as well as that pictorial history of what they're doing.
Yes, it's really it's a pretty perfect mesh of a lot of the things that I like to do. Food, photography. So yeah, I am less focused. No, that's not true. Everything, it's I think all these realms have creativity at their core, right? Mm-hmm. So whatever it is that one does, you can come at it from this source of creation and creativity. Baking bread is an art; it's an act of creation. Yeah. Cooking dinner for your family. It never ceases to inspire awe and wonder in me when the plant sprouts. Mm-hmm. And you're like, no way. That really just happened. All that was inside that seed. So, it's just about, I don't even remember now what the question was. But.
It's okay. No. That's so true, because even when you're little and you plant it in class, and you have to watch it grow, it's quite amazing.
Yeah. Year after year. And even the bread. I bake a couple times a week. I have a small little CSB.
CSB?
CSB is a community-supported bakery, but it's super tasty. It's a small group of folks that I bake bread for. And, every time the bread comes out, I'm just like, no way. Did I really just do that with 3 ingredients?
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Yeah, that's so interesting. And are there so in your CSB, community supported bakery, are there other bakers that you're baking with?
No, it's just something I do out of my home.
Okay.
But I'm connected to the bakers in the community, and everybody's really supportive.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
What words of wisdom did your grandmother from Italy and your mom give you growing up?
I would say, again, not really words as much as actions and a way of being and a way of living that, culturally was very different. And it was always there in the background. I grew up in Brooklyn, right? How much further away from my Brooklyn in the 70s, right? From my food source could I be? I had the full spectrum, right? I had a fully 50s, 60s era mother who, let me eat all kinds of crazy things, but also because she was Italian and she was raised in Italy. She would be making fresh pasta as just like a no big deal thing.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
So and just the care with food and shopping more frequently, just all these cultural things that until I was older and until I lived in Italy or until I started to look at food and where it came from, I didn't realize that was there already for me.
That's pretty cool. I mean, and it's just passed down without much thought, but it's part of your part of you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, just as we get older, it's always just so interesting to be able to ask those questions about our history.
Yeah. And is your grandmother still with you?
No.
Oh, okay.
But my mother is.
Yeah. So in a way, you're bringing back history with what you're doing. So how do you want to be remembered in history for what you're doing, or just in general?
Just in general, as a kind human being. That's in general.
Yes.
Really just God, it's so hard. Oh, okay. This is just a more general. There's a children's book called Miss Rumphius.
Okay.
That I used to read to my kid, and it's this woman who they call her the Lupine Lady, right? Okay. And her grandfather, I think, he'd talk about all the things she wanted to do, and someday I want to travel like you, I want to do this, I want to do that, and maybe it was the grandmother, I can't remember, would say, but you need to find a way to make the world a more beautiful place. And so that is how I hope I will be remembered in some way of having made the world a more beautiful place.
Oh, that's awesome.
What she did, she spread lupin seeds all over the place, and she became known as the Lupine Lady.
So was that a story from Italy?
No.
Okay.
It's not a story that I read as a child. It's a story that I found. It's a Barbara Clooney, I think, is the author. It's a fabulous book, actually. It's very...
I have to go look it up. Well, and it's funny because lupin is one of the top allergens in the European Union.
That I did not know.
Yes, and it's a legume, and they use it in a lot of gluten-free.
Really? Mm-hmm. No way.
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, and people who have, because it's in the legume and the peanut family, a lot of people with peanut allergies have issues with eating it.
Dang.
Yeah, so it's just kind of funny, but I'm definitely going to go look up that book. Okay, so I have two more questions, and one is like all the people in the network that you've got. Mm-hmm. What are you getting from them and trying to instill in them to grow this knowledge and this education around grains, heritage grains? Does that make sense, or is that too broad?
Hone it in a little more for me.
So, I'm assuming a lot of them are young farmers and they're learning and so what are you getting what are you learning from them, and then what are you trying to help instill with them to help them grow? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, the farmers, they range, the age range is everywhere.
Okay.
From younger to older, and and a lot of the growers, at least here in Boulder County, we're so lucky. We have an amazing farmers market. We have a lot of growers, really in just like a 15 to 20 mile radius. We have a gazillion farms and CSAs, but a lot of these growers grow for market, and they grow vegetables, and but have been interested in this idea of growing grains and having grains not just be a cover crop, but a cash crop as well. So, and growing them in a sustainable way and integrating them and having another, a viable market product.
Right.
But, one of the obstacles really, because there's so much infrastructure involved at the beginning of this project, and all throughout the movement is, it's this chicken and egg question, right? The farmers are like, okay, this is awesome. I'll grow it, but I need to know people are going to buy it. Like, well, okay. I mean, okay, we'll try to build demand, but if we build demand, we have to have product
right.
to fill that demand. So it's been this careful balance of really, taking smaller steps, really educating on both ends, and being an advocate for these grains, because we didn't even really talk about what has gone wrong with wheat in its current monoculture form, but it has really become not a sustainable plant, and very much a chemical based heavy feeder that really takes a toll on the soil. So the shift has to be everywhere. It has to be,
right.
You can't just take one of these varieties like Turkey Red, one of these heritage varieties, and say, all right, I'm going to grow, 10,000 acres of it and it's going to be a monocrop. No, I mean that, you have to go back to growing that. That won't work because that's not sustainable. And then you won't have the nutrition and the flavor because it won't be grown in a way that lends itself to that. So it's just it's a shift. If you're already a grain grower, it's a shift in thinking about how to grow these. They just grow a little bit differently.
And that's a whole nother learning process, because it's rotating your crops, rotating your animals, to grow this, to get the soil back to where it needs to be. And that's just a whole nother long learning process that is very intriguing. And, I'm sure that there's farmers out there that have regentrified their soil because of changing their processes, but that's a couple year process, right?
Yep. So there isn't this quick, I'll grow it and then you'll have it. No, there's there is a big learning curve.
Yeah. And it's changing your thought processes around it.
Yeah.
Okay. So my last question is, if you could have, and we could have another conversation about what has happened to wheat.
Sure.
Yeah.
Everything's on my website too.
Okay.
Curious, great books on there as well.
All right. So actually, let's put that in there right now. So it's the grain. I'm going to put it in the post. Thegrainlady.com.
Yep.
Grainlady.com. So that is now embedded as a text, as a message, and all of this stuff.
Great.
Okay. So if you could invite anyone over for bread that you've just freshly made, who would you invite to break bread with?
I thought about that question, and I thought, I'd actually really like to be on my great grandparents' farm, where my instead of inviting somebody to today, I would like to go back to that place and have a meal with them and be on their farm and grind.
And that's in Italy. Where in Italy is that?
In Bologna.
Okay.
Outside Bologna.
It's a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah.
I love Italy. Yes. There. That sounds so delicious in both heart and table and what you're eating. And so you never met them, I gather.
No.
Okay. Yeah, that would be so much fun. And is that where your grandmother was living as well?
Yeah. So my mother grew up in Bologna.
Okay.
And she grew up with her mother on her grandparents' farm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's very beautiful. Well, what would you like people to know about what you're doing, and how can they learn more besides going to thegrainlady.com, learning more about grains? But what would you like people to know more about what you're doing?
I think I would like people to know, that really they have this power to make these choices and to learn more and to really, in a way, you can make things happen in your own communities, just as I did.
Mm-hmm.
What we did with Noble Grain Alliance was to just start talking to farmers and start seeing who might be interested in seed and giving out seed and just starting on that level, talking to bakers, talking to restaurants and chefs and other platforms that could promote these grains. It's a long process, but I like to call it the final frontier of the farm to table movement, because grains really have been up until, 15, 20 years ago, haven't really been a part of that equation. And in many places, they still aren't.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of information out there, but it's the incredible flavor and the incredible nutrition you get from these grains. It's really exciting. It's exciting to be able to cook with these grains, and even it's really beautiful to see how they're grown.
That's awesome. Thank you for what you're doing, because it's really, and for all the people who have gut issues, it's something to look at.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I would also suggest the Colorado Grain Chain also.
Okay.
That's .com.
Okay. And I will put that here for everybody to look at and get some more information on. I just think it's really fun and different, and looking at it, looking at our health perspective around it and what it could potentially mean for not having to avoid a zillion different foods because you found something that actually works for you.
Right.
Yeah. And instead of saying, oh, I can't eat this, this, and this, and this,
right.
I found this and I can actually now enjoy bread and pasta.
Right.
And not to discount legume pasta and all of the new pasta. Yeah.
That's the thing. There's a place for everything.
Right.
And like you said, it's having the choice.
Yes. And there's a place for everybody at the table, no matter what you eat.
That's right. I love that.
Well, thank you, Mona Esposito, the Grain Lady. I love chatting with you, and I can't wait to learn so much more about you and what you're doing. I do think you're making history in what you're doing, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for including me.
You're welcome. And everybody, you've been listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where we talk to experts in all facets of food and beverage to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table and doesn't go away hangry. You can find us on all podcast platforms and every Wednesday here on Facebook group and on YouTube. And stay safe and eat well. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.